On a stage built to dazzle, where lights are measured in kilowatts and applause is a currency, a moment arrives that money cannot script. He sits in a VIP box, an unremarkable silhouette among the glare. An older man in tailored simplicity, careful not to call attention to himself. He has everything the cameras can sell: wealth, access, and image. Beside him, quietly, is the person who matters most to him in the world, his adopted daughter, holding an old guitar like a private talisman, not a prop. The show promised a spectacle. What it did not predict was a voice that would make the judges forget their lines. She is 30, in the way that some people are 30, both long-lived and recent, carrying years of quiet practice that no headline could encapsulate. Her adoption years earlier was never a tabloid narrative in their house. It was a string of small, persistent choices. A parent who learned to make coffee just right for two. A guardian who tended scraped knees and fragile hopes with the same hands that balanced ledgers. The larger world saw the signifiers of wealth. At home there were lullabies in the dark, the hum of a neighbor's bicycle, a battered guitar that had been restrung so many times its frets knew the curve of her fingers. Those early scenes matter because talent in this story grew from patient tending, not from a publicity stunt. There was a teacher in the block, Maya, whose studio smelled like old sheet music and lemon oil. Maya had patched broken strings with practiced fingers, taught scales until they took root like seeds. There was Jonah, the neighbor, who carried coffee and a reluctant smile, who would sit on the stoop while she practiced and hummed silent harmonies, never asking for recognition. And there was Lila, a friend from the community center, who helped move gear and wash the guitar case when it needed it. These people are small constellations. Their names won't trend, but their care made the voice possible. When a producer from a major televised talent show calls, they do not call for nuance. The producer sees an arc already written, a wealthy benefactor and the modest child he raised, a contrast that promises ratings. The team imagines a 30-second trailer, music swelling beneath images of city streets and glittering balloons. The writers draft language meant to tug, soft vowels, shorthand for a life of hardship overcome by charity. The producer talks about framing, B-roll, the camera angles that sell a story, close-ups of worn hands, wide shots of opulence juxtaposed with a small bench on a sidewalk. It reads clean on a pitch deck. But inside the apartment where the daughter tunes the guitar, the conversation is different. Maya is blunt. If you paint her as a spectacle, you take her voice and turn it into someone else's thing. Jonah says nothing at first. Then he leans forward, coffee cooling in his hand, and says, "She needs to say yes to this on her terms." Lila, practical as always, checks the strings and then looks up. If she goes, we go with her, not with the story they planned. The billionaire, for all his public unavailabilities and private certainty, has his own knots to untie. He did not adopt to make a showpiece. He adopted because there was an emptiness in his home he could not fix with charity checks. Yet now, with cameras keen and ratings waiting to be fed, he is learning the vocabulary of consent, how to step back, how to hear the word no without interpreting it as ingratitude. He listens as the team briefs him on narrative and optics. He hears them before he hears his daughter. Then she says she will sing if she can choose everything about the performance from the song to the coat she wears, if the story told is honest and not a tableau for pity. He agrees. That agreement is small but crucial. It is an adult parent ceding control to the young adult he loves. Backstage, the show hums with efficient nervousness. There are makeup kits and precise light plots. There are producers with clipboards rewriting the biographical crawl to be sharper, cleaner, more clickable. The head producer speaks about viewers' emotional journey as if feelings were a potent commodity. The director suggests a wardrobe that will read humble under the lights. A segment producer asks if the guitar should show its worn edges to underscore authenticity. The daughter, when she is asked, pauses, then asks simply, "Can I bring my own guitar?" The room seems to hold its breath at something smaller than drama. She wants the instrument that remembers her fingers. A quiet conversation follows, the one that will matter most later. Maya and Lila sit with the daughter under the tent of a truck where equipment is stored, and Jonah leans against the van, an anchor in jeans. They talk not about the cameras, but about what music means to her. "Sing for yourself," Maya says, not flippantly, but as a practice. "If they give you applause, take it, but don't let them reword your life." She clarifies what consent looks like in this strange new place. Permission to refuse a certain shot. Insistence that the footage won't be used to manufacture a narrative the daughter hates. A demand that the producers get written permission for any intimate biographical angle. The show agrees, in a guarded corporate way that reads as a signed form in a binder. The billionaire watches the paperwork and the faces around him. It is the first thing he has signed that feels like it belongs to someone else. On stage, the lights are white and patient, not the gaudy wash used for manufactured tears. The daughter walks out alone, the guitar and old companion slung across her chest. The audience is a map of expectations, some leaning forward with curiosity, others already composing the story they will tell after. The judges sit on a bench of history. Their job is to be surprised just enough to keep viewers returning. One judge is known for a barbed sense of humor, another for a facile generosity that runs toward spectacle, and a third who usually nods with a practiced patience. They have seen this narrative before, the sob story that turns into a singing reveal. They brace for the script. She begins. At first the sound is small, like someone opening a door you didn't know you had. The opening phrase is tentative, the kind of voice that shapes itself around memory more than technique. A guitar string hums, an honest metallic whisper. Then, as she leans into the chorus, the voice finds its span. It is a voice that does not aspire to be grand. It simply is. The room leans. Microphones, trained to collect everything, barely capture the hushed attention. The air in the studio contracts as if hearing requires less breath. Her tone carries textures, ragged edges where late-night practice bleeds into performance, soft curves where lullabies linger. There is a clarity in her phrasing that feels like a hand passing a delicate object without breaking it. The cameras, which are used to dictating what to see, can only follow. Somewhere in the audience a whisper dies. A judge's pencil stops mid-note on their sheet. One judge, who had prepared a quip to undersell the narrative, lowers their chin as though to make room for the sound. The humor is gone, replaced by the sudden humility of an instrument hearing its master for the first time. The performance does not climax with fireworks. It unfolds with slow certainty. A final chord trembles in the soundboard and then releases. The stage hangs in an honest silence, the kind that forms after something true has been spoken aloud. The judges blink. Applause arrives, first polite, then widening into a roomful need to respond to what it has just witnessed. But the bravo is not a closing title. It is the beginning of a long conversation. The judge, known for barbed remarks, stands, not to deliver a show line, but to apologize in a small, human sentence. "I didn't know what to expect, and I owed you better than that." Cameras catch the reflexive humility, and social media catches every nuance. Clips spread. Within hours, millions have seen the moment. The narrative that producers imagined before the song started frays at the edges. People do not just marvel at the voice. They notice the care team backstage, the signed consent forms, the fact that the guitar was hers. Many viewers celebrate. Others ask sharper questions. Was this orchestrated for sympathy? Did the show profit from friction between vulnerability and spectacle? Those conversations will not be resolved in 24 hours. Online, the clips are rearranged into memes, long-form reaction videos and earnest think pieces. Some posts celebrate the billionaire as benevolent, others question whether his presence on the show was another form of publicity. Crucially, hashtags do not simplify into a single storyline. There are threads that ask how media frames stories about people with complicated public identities, and threads that detail the small supporters' names and work. Maya the teacher, Jonah the neighbor, Lila the friend, people who do not want the spotlight but who remind viewers that talent is a communal venture. The production faces pressure, not legal pressure, but public scrutiny, which in the entertainment world is often the same as a gentle shove toward accountability. The show announces an internal review of its storytelling practices. The producer who once spoke about viewers' emotional journey now listens in a public forum to advocates from community arts organizations who explain how narratives can reduce, rather than dignify, lived experience. The show's leadership commits to drafting better consent procedures, clearer forms, mandatory pre-interviews with the artists alone, and a policy that prohibits manufacturing stages of hardship simply to sell emotion. They partner with local music centers to fund programming. These are small concessions against a long history of commodifying sorrow, but concrete and specific, a first step, not a grand solution. Behind the headlines, things change in practical ways. The billionaire does not issue a grandiose statement. Instead, he meets with the staff at the community center, sits at a small table with a stack of guitar cases and a single pot of coffee, and asks the same question he had learned to ask months earlier: how can I help without making it about me? The director of the center outlines a plan: an instrument repair fund, weekly scholarships for lessons, and a paid position for a program coordinator to run outreach to schools that lack music education budgets. He agrees. The arrangement includes checks and balances, trustees from the community center, a small board that includes Maya and Lila, and an annual report published for transparency. It is deliberately designed to avoid the single big headline and instead to seed systems that support many young musicians. They create a modest fund for instrument repairs, guitars with new strings, drumheads replaced, broken bows mended. They also set up sponsored lesson hours, vouchers that can be redeemed at the community center or with partnering teachers. The billionaire hires teachers directly for a pilot program, paying professional musicians to run evening classes in under-resourced neighborhoods. He funds a small residency for local musicians to mentor students and to perform with them, ensuring exposure is paired with support and coaching. These moves do not erase the power imbalance. They acknowledge it and attempt to redistribute resources where long-term impact is possible. The daughter does not disappear into a star-making machine. She takes the offers that align with the terms she defined after her conversation backstage. There are invitation emails to perform at larger venues, but she chooses smaller, deliberate rooms at first. The community center, a neighborhood coffeehouse, an intimate benefit for music teachers. She signs a few agreements that ensure she retains creative control and that no footage is used without her explicit consent. She agrees to collaborate on the Instrument Funds Committee, not as a figurehead, but as someone who helps decide which schools get first access. That is part of her measure of agency, not simply who profits from the performances, but who gets to shape the structures that emerge afterward. The narrative arc widens. Maya expands her studio hours and runs an afternoon program where children who cannot afford private lessons can learn chords and basic music theory. Jonah organizes volunteer sessions, parents hauling gear, the occasional retired luthier offering to restring guitars for free. Lila coordinates outreach, traveling to schools and helping young players get to rehearsals. The fund pays for these logistics, but the heart of the program is the people who have always done the slow work of repair, the teacher who stays late, the neighbor who listens, the friend who practices harmonies in the park. The show, having felt the heat of public scrutiny, convenes a panel discussion about narrative ethics in entertainment. Producers sit beside ethicists, community leaders, and artists to talk about best practices. One producer admits on air that the team had not always considered the lived consequences of its framing choices. The admission is less than perfect, but it is also a seed for change. The show drafts a best practices charter, mandatory informed consent checklists, a clause ensuring artists can opt out of biographical segments, and a partnership requirement with local arts organizations for any human interest pieces. That charter does not overturn an entire ecosystem, but it reframes internal incentives. Ratings still matter, but the route to them is constrained by new guardrails that prioritize dignity. Not everyone is satisfied. Some commentators call for deeper reforms. Some artists warn against co-optation. These critiques are necessary because meaningful change requires friction. But in the middle of debate, the community's work moves forward in the quieter places. The neighborhood center's sign is patched and painted. The instrument repair fund's first disbursement pays for 50 new sets of strings and replaces 5 cracked guitar necks. That autumn, the daughter conducts a weekend workshop for young players, an arrangement that looks simple on paper but is profoundly transformative in practice. She begins by letting the students tune their guitars, listening to each one as if that small act were its own ritual. When she sings with them, it is not as a headliner but as an equal, sitting on a low stool, fingers scarred the way their fingers are scarred, voice steady and unillustrated. Her modest trajectory toward an artistic life is not a meteoric rise. She takes steady steps, a small regional tour organized with the community center, a few radio interviews where she speaks carefully about practice and consent, a recording session that she controls, produced with local musicians and distributed with proceeds supporting the instrument fund. Fans who had cheered in the television studio find ways to contribute locally rather than simply idolizing her distance. Some of her performances are paid, others are barter for studio time or community events. The billionaire's involvement becomes less visible in publicity materials because his aim had shifted from public recognition to the quiet effectiveness of structural support. The judges' reactions remain a part of the public memory. One judge writes a short statement acknowledging the earlier misstep and committing to be more thoughtful. Another reaches out to meet with the daughter and the community leader to learn what responsibility sounds like in practice. These gestures are symbolic and they matter. They do not substitute for structural work, but they create openings for dialogue. The production issues its internal memo about consent and pulls footage that might be misused. It continues to air the performance, but with care. The context is presented not as a spectacle, but as a conversation starter. Months pass. The initial viral spike flattens into a series of small, meaningful events. The daughter teaches a Saturday class to a dozen teenagers. One of them arrives with a borrowed guitar and leaves with a voucher for free lessons and a string change appointment. Maya secures a small grant that allows her to buy a few keyboards and ukuleles so that music can be more accessible. The billionaire quietly funds a traveling van for instruments and gear, so students can get to rehearsals without worrying about transport. These are not glamorous headlines, but they are durable. There are mistakes along the way. A marketing team at one point drafts a promotional image that feels too contrived, and the community pushes back. The billionaire listens and says, "Take it down," not as an act of grand repentance, but as a small correction. The show revisits its editorial guidelines when a producer's private email leaks, revealing a flippant remark about emotional beats. That misstep sparks public critique and internal change. Now the show requires that human interest segments be reviewed by an external advisory panel. Policy follows error. Policy is rarely miraculous, but it is measurable. Through all this, The daughter's voice continues to surprise, not because of an initial viral moment, but because it is present in rooms chosen with consent. She refuses offers that would require her to rehearse a tear for the camera. She accepts invitations where the audience is small, attentive, and there by choice. Over time, she records an EP with local musicians, not to chase charts, but to document a small body of work that honors her roots. Part of the proceeds go back to the instrument fund. She insists on crediting the teachers and friends who sustained her practice. There is humility in this, not a retreat from opportunity, but a claim to how opportunity should look. The community's music programs flourish in ways that were not inevitable. The Instrument Repair Fund is managed by a committee that includes a retired luthier, a music teacher, a community center director, and a local school representative. They create a transparent application process for schools and individual students, prioritizing partnerships that include a plan for sustained lessons and mentorship rather than one-off performances. The Billionaire's involvement is recorded in minutes and receipts. The community breathes easier, knowing that resources are being allocated with oversight rather than spectacle. If there is a single image that returns in memory, it is not the bright glare of television, but a quieter dusk in a neighborhood hall. The daughter sits on a scuffed chair under a soft amber light, teaching a small class. Her guitar is covered in stickers and a new scarf tied to the headstock. Children crowd around with mismatched instruments. Some bring store-bought ukuleles, some old guitars with patchwork repairs. She listens to each of them with a patience learned from the teacher who patched strings by hand and the neighbor who learned to hum along. When she sings with them, the room swells, not with the quantity of listeners, but with the quality of shared attention. The change here is incremental and moral more than monetary. Systems have been nudged. Producers now have a code of conduct when dealing with guests. The television show's outreach department meets quarterly with local arts leaders. A small but growing network of teachers exchanges resources and referrals. The Billionaire still has power, but now much of that power is channeled through structures that require accountability. The daughter still has the same voice, but it is no longer only the voice that broke a studio's expected narrative. It is a voice that has chosen where it will be heard and who will be invited into the rooms it chooses. Not everything is solved. Critics remain vigilant. Some artists note that media ecosystems still favor spectacle, and they are right. The daughter's story exposes fissures rather than closes them. Yet there is progress. A repair fund in place, lessons being taught, a production company that now consults with community partners before airing sentimental pieces. The activist energy that rose in the aftermath did not call for instant reparation, but for better processes. And those processes, however modest, begin to hold. One evening, the daughter sits with Jonah outside the community center. Rain has washed the street, and the lamps throw a kind, diffuse glow. She runs her fingers along the guitar, and Jonah tells a small joke about the first time he heard her practice. They laugh, not because their lives have been transformed overnight, but because they have learned to keep the small things that make life livable. The guitar's wood is worn where her fingers have blessed it. Each scar tells of practice, not pity. She plans a neighborhood concert next month and asks Jonah to bring coffee. He agrees. The last scene is intentionally simple. A small hall, paper streamers frayed at the edges, a handful of folding chairs, and a seasoned guitar used like a map. She performs again, not for critics, but for neighbors, students, and the people who taught her to keep playing. The audience is a collage of faces, some who saw the television clip months ago, others who never did, and have only ever known this voice in their block. When she sings, the room listens like a body, all parts aligned. It is not a spectacle manufactured for ratings, but it is unmistakably public. In the end, that is the quiet revolution of the story. a movement from being seen as an object of spectacle to being treated like a participant in a shared cultural life. If this story moved you, if it made you think about how stories are told and who gets to tell them, there are ways to help beyond applause. Check the description to learn about community music programs and how you can support instruments, lessons, and ethically run arts access initiatives in your area. Small, consistent investments do more than one viral clip ever could. They make music possible for the next voice that needs a room to belong to.